Hi, mummies. Welcome back. This is Mommy Diaries. My name is Mpumelelo Magagula. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is the first week of April, and if you didn't know, April is Autism Awareness Month, and I have someone, just the perfect person to talk to us about this, because some of us live with autism and we are not aware. Some of us are raising kids that do live with autism. So I am joined by Rethabile Molapisane, who is an autism advocate. She is a parenting coach as well as education and research consultant. Yes. So let us welcome her into the Mommy Diaries house. Hi, Sis Rita.
Hi, Nompumelelo. Thank you very much for having me on your mommy hub.
Thank you so much for joining me and the other mummies to, give us this awareness.
Pleasure.
So, for those who don't know, because not many of us know, what is autism? How do we describe autism?
So, autism is a very complex condition that involves a lot of the different parts of the body, primarily the brain. So, it is referred to as a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects the child's ability to understand language and to speak. It also affects their ability to reason, to be able to make sense of their world. They struggle to make decisions like, when is it safe to cross the road? They just go, so there's no sense of danger. Yeah, which is called impulsivity, which is, also part of the autism diagnosis. Some of them are very impulsive, some of them are very hyperactive. And it is also described as a metabolic disorder because it affects the way the body processes the food we eat, the gut environment, which is your stomach, and the neurotransmitters that are produced there, which are responsible for proper functioning of the brain. So that's why I was saying it's a very complex. And as more research is being done, more and more things are being identified to explain what autism really is. In the beginning, in the past 10 years or so, the cause of autism was unknown, but there's a lot of research in that particular field of neuroscience that's beginning to, give us nuggets of here and there what could be the cause. Others, researchers have found that it is also a problem with, cell-to-cell communication. Our cells are meant to be able to communicate to each other, to relay messages, so they've just found that there's a disconnect between cell-to-cell interactions, mainly due to, the production of energy. So, that link is not there. So, as we have a better understanding, then we begin to build on what we think could be the cause of autism.
I'm glad you touched on the fact that most doctors don't know what the cause could be, because when I was reading up on it, I was shocked that, wow, there's no cause for this, because it said somewhere there is no cause for autism. So we wouldn't really know what the cause is. I'm really glad you touched on that, because I was going to ask if vele it is like that. And I'd like to know, because autism is complex, right? And people also need to know that it is not an illness or a disease. Am I correct?
Yes, it's not a disease, and because a disease is something that can be transmitted, from one person to another. You can't catch autism by living with autism. So it's not a disease. It is rather referred to as a condition or a disorder. Disorder means things are not the way they should be. And hence you have people that are now termed neurotypical, which is, you're typically what we expect to see in the growth of a child. And then the neurotypical ones who present differently for the same age group.
Great. And do we have different types of autism?
Yes, we do. That's why it's called a spectrum. So it's called autism spectrum disorder. So one particular child with autism presents very differently from the next child. I have two children on the autism spectrum. They present very, very differently. They both can be hyperactive. Some are hypoactive. So you find a child who's just really not interested in what's happening around them. Those are the ones who would have a hypoactive presentation. And then you have the first ones like mine. Mine are hyperactive because they also have an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder diagnosis attached to that as well. So they're like really busy. They struggle to sit down, to concentrate on tasks. So they need medication for that. And then you also have those who are said to be high functioning. Everything looks like it's okay, and they can talk, they can reason, they can make good decisions. They look like they're, neurotypical. But you find that they are struggling with some of the challenges of autistic people, like repetitive behaviors, obsessive compulsive disorders where things have to be exactly the same every day. And if that doesn't happen, they have a meltdown. Things must be lined up. My children line up things a lot. So then you have those who have a very high IQ, meaning that they can function in like your mainstream school, and they can be independent in the world. And then you have those ones that are, don't have such a high IQ, that need more support, So it's a spectrum. In the past, researchers and doctors used to think that people on the autism spectrum were retarded, but we found that that's not true. And then later on, they were identified as savants. These are the ones who have an incredible memory. They can go through, a city and remember every single building and every single street that they've seen, My eldest son is like that. He remembers every single street we've ever been on, every single road. And then he would come home and he would Google the name of the street and he would watch the cars go through that way. And he's also really brilliant with being able to construct roads. He does that with his hands outside. And he, with the toys that we've bought him, he would construct bridges. So you can already see his interest. But mostly what really characterizes an autism diagnosis is repetitive behaviors, struggling with your sensory environment like noise, light, textures, taste, and also being able to understand communication, even though others can speak, but they don't really get the normal nuances of language, like jokes, for instance. They take everything literally. So and other people would say, well, they don't lie, autistic people don't lie, but it's also a function that they some of them don't have, the ability to tell stories that are untrue, because for them everything is literal. Did you eat today? Yes. It's your brother.
It's funny
you
mentioned that because I was watching a video I think a few days ago, and then it was a video of a chef and a waitress. So the chef was being sarcastic, but the waitress took everything quite literal. And there were people in the comment section who were like, I don't really understand sarcasm. With me, you have to be straightforward. Because if you're going to be sarcastic, I'm going to take that thing as literal as you say it.
Yes, literally. So, and that also, does tell you that they really, that part of the brain that understands language, and it's not working as it should, because we all get to learn about jokes and we all get to laugh about them and we all get to tell jokes, so it's a skill that would have to be learned, not naturally picked up, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And you mentioned also that there's the high functioning autism. I think I know people like Elon Musk. I'm not sure if you knew Elon Musk and Chris Bacon. They did say that they do have the high functioning autism. I think it's called Asperger's.
Yeah, that's what it used to be called. We don't use the term anymore.
It's changed now. Oh, I
Yeah.
didn't know.
Autism spectrum. It's now autism spectrum disorders. But yes, that's what it
Okay.
used to be called. That's the one I was referring to earlier on, where you can pretty much function in the world. But you're really, really struggling with sound. You're struggling with changes, in your environment, change of plans. Like you've got to use the same road every day. And if you miss that particular bus that always comes at the same time, your days are completely thrown over, So it becomes autism if you're unable to really function, in society.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, the doctor would give you an autism diagnosis.
We live and we learn. I didn't know that. And are there what are some of the common signs? Because I know that we really don't have to diagnose ourselves. You need to go to a doctor for you to be diagnosed. But when should you now say, okay, I need to go to a doctor to take my child there or myself there because of this and this sign?
Okay, so with younger children, because this becomes really important, with younger children, language. A child should be able to at least say 10 words, by the time they are 3, language. You're still having a child who's babbling. You're kind of like really struggling to.
Yeah.
They're not forming words. And another one is scripting, where they memorize particular words or sentences and they say them over and over and over again. It's called scripting. So it can be from a movie or favorite cartoon, and also when they don't respond to their names when you call them, that's very common.
Yeah.
They don't make eye contact when you talk to them. When they don't show interest in the environment. You know how kids, when they're fascinated with something, they'll point and say tree, dog, cow. Pointing, not happening in most of the cases. They walk on their tippy toes often. They love to spin. They spin and spin and spin around the house without falling. So you know that something is a bit off. Potty training is also very, very difficult. And they also struggle with instructions. A child between the ages of 3 to 5 should be able to follow a 3-word instruction. Come sit down, take off your shoes, go upstairs, and wash your hands, go put your plate in the sink. Simple instructions like that, they really don't understand them. So language has to be taught to them literally. Baby steps using pictures and using other strategies. So yeah, that kind of like really at least gives you a bit of a, and then for those that present like they're hyperactive, they would really struggle to sit down on a table to finish their food or to complete a task, a small task, just sit down and color. They also show very poor use of their hands. They struggle to tie shoelaces, to button up, to use a crayon, to color. So they have poor fine motor tone. So yeah, if you've had a child, or you've been in an environment where there's been younger children, your nieces, your nephews, what a neurotypically developing child is like. So you would be able to recognize that for the children that were born in the same year, I think mine is left behind. So many parents would be told by doctors, no, just wait a bit. If it's boys are a bit slow. But I would say listen to your gut feel as a parent. I think God has given all of us that sense of something's not quite right, intuition. Don't delay. Make sure that you go to a pediatrician and you ask for a referral to see a neuropediatrician. And then an OT, an occupational therapist, and a speech therapist, so that you start the process early. Early intervention makes a huge difference. It's like the difference between hope and nothing, literally. Because, the brain of a child develops the fastest in the first 1,000, the first 1,000 days. Of their life. So between when they're born and when they're 6, that's like where rapid growth takes place. So if you're unable to intervene at that time, then, occupational therapy doesn't become as effective and speech therapy. Not that it's impossible if you really didn't know earlier, but it's just a slower process.
Yeah. It's like when I hear you mentioning all those things, it occurs to me, Wuti, as parents, sometimes you might think, I think we need to be more vigilant of how they act.
Yeah.
And not all the time does it mean that I think with what you've said, we need to be vigilant and take everything seriously.
Yeah, I mean, when I had my firstborn, I honestly didn't know anything about autism. I just knew that this child is too much,
Yeah.
Like and as a parent, you do what you have seen your parents do, You know what to do, man. You shout at them, you give them a little spank on the hand and say, no, don't do that, But that wasn't working. I was like, what kind of child is this? And then I started to realize that 1+1 is not true here. You take them to school, you hear that they've been crying the whole day waiting for you. So separation anxiety is also one of those things where you can't leave this child with anyone. They're just so, attached to the people in their lives. So that's also a sign, because it's something children are supposed to outgrow, for example. Yeah, so, we forgive ourselves because we didn't know better. When we know better, we do better.
Exactly. And now that you've taken us through the signs, the common signs that we can look out for in children. Also, I was surprised to find out that there's people who were diagnosed with autism in their late 30s, their late 50s. So, because when I was reading up on it, or when I first heard about autism, I thought, okay, you detected at an early age, but I was surprised to see that people at 30s and 50s also get diagnosed. How does it happen that you go through almost all your life and then no one picks up the signs of autism, and then only later it happens that, oh, you're diagnosed with autism?
So, research is showing that, in females especially, the autism doesn't really manifest itself as severely as in men, or boy children.
Okay.
So, girls in nature like to please, So you learn to mask to fit in. It's more of an important social thing for girls than it is for boys. I mean, boys are pretty aloof at the time when they're growing up. They just want to play, but women crave connection because that's how we're made. So you learn to mask. You learn to fit in. You learn how people respond. Okay, if I respond this way, I don't get such a nice connection with others. So I will learn to behave more like Balesa or Tato, So the masking, makes the diagnosis for those that are in your life harder, because you seem to be ticking all the boxes of what is normal behavior, but you yourself are really struggling. So when you're much older, you know that, hi man, now that I know about such a thing such as autism, I think when I do a self-check online, I realize the traits are ticking all the boxes for that particular condition. So, but I also think it's because back in the day, about 10 years or more, the tools that were used that are now being developed to diagnose autism were not there. We didn't have, those, they call them DSM-5 or DSM-4 guidelines to say, okay, if you present this way, then the name of the condition is XYZ, is autism, for instance. Yeah, so remember that autism, people that were autistic were regarded as retarded. So if your child had a high IQ, oh, well, they're just busy, they'll outgrow it. They're airy fairy, they're butterflies, they're busy, baganga,
Yeah.
But when now yourself, that you are struggling, You're struggling with noise. You're struggling with overcrowded places. You struggle to eat certain foods and you don't know why. You don't like being wet. You struggle with wearing shoes. You'd rather walk barefoot. There's just like a lot of things. You struggle to understand what people are saying, and you don't always know how to respond. And you seem to be stuck in conversations. You just only want to talk about what you're interested in, and then you find out later, oh God, like for instance, my own self, I self-diagnosed myself of possible ADHD, even though it might be on the mild side in a sense that it doesn't inhibit me from functioning, but I really struggle to shut down. Like my mind is all over the place. Like I could be doing 3 or 4 projects at once and and I just really struggle to shut down. It's a superpower for me because it means that I get more done and I work well under pressure, but it's also you know what I mean, it's not a superpower on that one side because I get really overwhelmed and really exhausted. And I'm also prone to depression and prone to anxiety because of the possible ADHD diagnosis. Nobody has really ever diagnosed me, but I suspect I do have. And, those in my life always say, you are so energetic. Yeah.
And there is no way we can prevent things like ADHD and autism, right? Are we born with such things?
Yeah, definitely. It is a genetic disorder as well. Those are mental illness is mostly, especially in children, inherited. You might find that, like I've said, that I've just realized that I might actually have ADHD. My children are incredibly hyperactive, and I don't think I was any different. My mother would say, you're naughty, but it wasn't being naughty. It was just really being hyper, and being impulsive. You want to do it, you do it now, So basically it's a genetic disorder. So if you're, but it's more prevalent in boys, the autism. So if your first born boy child has it, chances are whatever subsequent boy child you have will also have it, which is what happened to me, though the severity is less in the offspring that comes afterwards.
That is why I was asking, because you mentioned that you suspect that you might have ADHD and you're raising kids with autism. So made me think that
ADHD. They all have ADHD, by the way.
You see, that is why I was asking that question.
The girl doesn't have autism, but she has ADHD. Yeah.
Oh, it makes sense. I think this is information we never knew we needed, because at some point as you grow up or as you become a parent, you do hear things like, postpartum depression, autism, ADHD, but you don't take them to heart because you're like, okay, there's a word, but we never really give ourselves time to learn about them, to know about them in the science. So I think this conversation is really, really important. And now I want to know that, should it happen that maybe I have a child with who lives with autism, do they need special treatment? Do I treat them in a certain way, or I continue to treat them as I would treat a normal child?
I think because, they are special needs, they require special care. Discipline, for instance, because it is an important part of growing up, to be taught what's right and what's wrong, what's acceptable in society and what's not appropriate. You treat them differently in a sense that they learn differently. What kind of discipline works for my daughter without autism will not be the same as the discipline that I give the boys. And she has a serious struggle with this. But why do they get to do that and I don't get to do that? Every time they I want the phone, you give it to them and you don't give me the phone. So I've had to learn to teach her to say, your brothers have a very special brain and they work differently. So they don't understand waiting. So we are still teaching them how to wait. Wait a hand, wait,
Okay.
so they don't understand it like you do. If you say, can I use it, can I watch something? I can say, wait a little bit, finish your homework, and then you can afterwards. But for them, it's a process. So there is a different way of teaching them. There's a different way of communicating. You use shorter sentences. In the beginning, you use one word, come, sit, food, drink, sleep, and then you gradually build on that. You add verbs now to the nouns as they learn that, okay, now this is called a cup, this is a phone, these are your hands, these are mommy's glasses, no touch, so slowly you begin to build up. So you can't really speak to them in like a full sentence with like, 5 words or 6 words. You just look at it, it's like gibberish. Older autistics will tell you that it sounded like a completely different language altogether.
Oh.
Their
So
brains
this also means that
process that much information at once.
That's interesting, because I'm like, oh my God, we really, really need to learn. I think.
Yeah, I had to learn.
I'm even lost for words. So I think that as a parent raising an autistic child, also this gives you a chance to learn also, because you need to learn now how to communicate, as you say. Because now I wouldn't be aware that I'm raising an autistic child, but also even after knowing, it's going to take time to, unlearn and relearn things. Also, I think as parents also need to give ourselves time, because now you need to communicate.
Is available now, it's not like in the past where we didn't have access to the internet. More and more of us, have access to the internet, unless you live in a much more rural community. So there is definitely a need to raise awareness in more rural communities or disadvantaged.
And now I would like to know also, is it expensive to raise an autistic child? Do government facilities offer any support or help should, a parent feel a need to reach out?
It's a challenge. It really is a challenge. It's incredibly expensive, unfortunately. To raise an autistic child, especially in our country, because government support is available, but it's limited. You know what I mean? You do have access to like a SASSA grant if you apply, but it's also based on a salary scale. If you can prove that you're unemployed, if you can prove that you earn less than 5,000 Rand a month. But if you earn a little bit more than that, you're deemed, that you don't qualify, which is really sad, because the cost of autism does not go down based on how much you earn. Buying food for children with autism is very expensive. You need to be intentional about what they eat. You need to make sure that their food doesn't have sugar, it doesn't have preservatives, flavorants. This would be your normal chips, snacks, you need to make sure that their food is not made out of red dye, because that actually makes the ADHD worse. They need to eat food that is gluten-free. Not all of them, but most of them do have a problem with their tummies and their guts, and gluten or wheat has been seen to really cause inflammation and hence interferes with neurotransmitters that make your brain work. So they need to eat food that's like really expensive. And for some, lactose also seems to be a problem. It makes their brain sleep. Sometimes, they say, drink milk if you want to sleep.
Yeah.
Milk kind of like sedates you. It makes you, feel like you want to sleep. You give this to autistic kids, they really go to bed. Like, their brain doesn't work, and at school, they're just not really there, or they just really struggle because it puts their brain to sleep in a much, more intensified way than with a normal person. So you're going to have to learn how to look for foods that don't have lactose. Lactose-free milk is expensive. Doesn't matter what it is. Almond, rice, so oat milk. And you're going to also have to learn to find foods that don't have gluten. And that's expensive. But I found, it's not cheaper, but it's more affordable way of making sure that my children are still getting the nutrition they need. I've gone back to how I was raised. We used to eat sorghum, like mabele, You buy that. You buy sorghum, you make them that porridge, You give them oats. So we are eating cleaner, as, they would say in today's language. More vegetables, more boiled foods, less, of your fried foods. Instead of using sunflower oil, we use canola oil or coconut oil, because olive oil is expensive, even though it is the ideal kind of oil. And then you've got to give them like supplements like omega-3s. So if you can't afford those, you're going to have to make sure that they eat a lot of pill shots, tin fish. Which also has its disadvantages because it's in a tin, and then it's like sometimes heavy metals that get into the food, which is not good for autistic kids, because they really struggle to detoxify their bodies. And then water as well. The water they drink, you need to treat it to make sure that the impurities come to the bottom and they drink cleaner water. So I use activated charcoal. You put activated charcoal in the water and you let it settle, and then you give them that. You buy them bottled water if you can afford that. So there's other ways, but you have to be more intentional about it. Like, for instance, I make my own muesli. My kids love muesli.
Okay.
So I make my own muesli made out of oats and, fried grains and all of that. Things that I know what I put in there. Instead of buying. So you're going to have to make choices like that. Your normal pap, you're going to have to go look for one that doesn't have GMOs or genetically modified organisms. You're going to have to look for the yellow pap, the ones that we eat when there's like a famine in the land. It's called polenta in the shops. So we use that yellow pap. We buy that yellow pap and we buy the GMO-free pap. And we found places and ways in which we can have it more affordably. Rye bread versus normal bread, store-baked bread versus pre-packaged bread, So it's small things like that. Oh, and probiotics, that's very, very important.
Oh, okay.
So, if you can't afford probiotics, make sure that your kids eat a lot of sour milk, because it has already gone through the process of fermentation and there's lactobacillus in it, And then chicken broth is also very good, and bone broth. When we grew up, they would boil a lot of bones in winter.
Yes.
And we ate that a lot. That stuff is really good for healing the gut and healing the brain.
Okay.
Right.
Sorry. I know Guningi, it is expensive, but as you say, we can always find ways of working around that and make it, viable for our families. Thank you so much for this information. So as we end this, I'd like to know if you have any tips for mummies or anything you'd like to pass to mummies as a mom who's raising kids with autism. So, and yeah, that's how we're going to end it.
Well, I always say that, all children are a gift from God, whether or not they're neurotypical or they have some, medical condition or disability. And at the end of the day, we've been entrusted with them, and we have a, responsibility, and we have to do due diligence. You cannot say, I was given this child and I do not have resources. Well, you have a brain, you have hands, use them. I've had to homeschool my kids because I couldn't afford to the exorbitant amounts of, expensive special schools, because government schools are in shortage, for instance. You teach your children what you know. My grandmother taught all of us before we went to grade 1. There was no crèche in those days, She made sure that everybody knew how to write their name and everybody knew how to count, Use that, mothers are the best teachers to their children. They're the best therapists. They're the best friend, that a child can have. So you are enough as a mother. If you find yourself in a situation like that, do not doubt your ability, your God-given ability to help your child. And don't be afraid to talk. Let us destigmatize mental illness. It's not a curse. It's not witchcraft. It's not not following omens or rituals or all of that. It is a medical condition. There is room for spirituality on the journey, as it is with life in general. But let us not, allow those, preconceived ideas or, perspectives of other people to determine quality of life we can give our children. And we are doing a great job with what we have. When we know better, we do better.
Amen to that. And that is how it close today's installment of Mommy Diaries. Thank you so much, Sister Rita. This is a well-needed awareness. This is a well-needed information. And I think myself and other mummies have definitely learned a lot from you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And have a good day further.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.